Hello, everyone. Welcome to IFFR Afterthoughts with Marta Popivoda, the Director of Landscapes of Resistance. This is the second feature of Marta, and it competes in the Tiger Award competition. Hello, Marta.
Hi.
Great to see you, and thanks for joining us today. Um, I will start maybe with a general question. When was the first time you met Sonia? Can you encounter this moment?
Yes, definitely. I met Sonia actually a long time ago in 2006 or 7, I think it was 6, because she was actually a grand aunt of my partner at the time, but also today, who is actually a co-writer of the script, Anna Bujanovic. And I met her, I mean, not just because she was her relative, but also because of her story and her history, because I was interested to meet her. Back then, Anna and I were very much involved in the leftist organizations, activist organizations at the Belgrade independent cultural artistic scene. So we were interested in this heritage and this history. And actually, when I met Sonia and when she started telling us her story, I was really fascinated by the story itself, but also the way she is telling the story. And this was a trigger for me actually to really have an idea to make a film.
Yes, I wanted to ask you about the style of the film. Uh, Most of the time, we don't see Sonia's face, we don't see her, but we do hear her voice. And it's almost like an audio portrait of Sonia. So I'm wondering why you decided to focus on the voice rather than on the face.
Yeah, this whole process lasted actually for a long time, and over, I mean, more than 10 years. Anna and I recorded the interviews with Sonia. I mean, these interviews were also recorded with image, but I definitely was not interested in making like a talking head film, or not because I have something against this, but because I thought that. There is really a power of her storytelling in the way in the way of her storytelling, because for me, she produces images in my head. It's like reading a film script. And then I actually wanted to give space to this mental and verbal images. So my directorial idea was actually to confront these images that she produces in our head with the landscapes where the stories happened. So this was the main directorial gesture I made, and that's why the film is very much in the audio. But also on the other hand, it was, for me, it was very important that this voice of hers, it's not the only dominant thing in the film. I also wanted to make the landscapes alive. That's why the balance between what we hear from the location sound and the landscapes and her voice is kind of equally important for me.
I also feel that landscapes have a double role in the film. They are places of memory and oblivion at once. Can you maybe elaborate on this? Because I think the film works precisely with the issues of memory and history and the way we interpret history now.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I would say that the film has, it's not a historical film for me. It's a film which has a contemporary perspective on this story. It's also, I mean, maybe it's more a film about why this story is important to us who made the film than about the history that happened. I mean, maybe it's equally important. But to go back to the landscape, I was thinking a lot about, this methodological gesture to go back to the landscapes where the story stories happen, also because I think Serbia or Yugoslavia changed a lot from that time. I wanted to see these places and how they look today. But on the other hand, in the film, you see a very also specific approach to the landscape. There is a kind of idea to look at the landscape from different perspectives at the same time. So there is this question of a perspective, which I try to elaborate in cinematic time-based medium. And I actually had an idea and a reference that I'm making a kind of constructivist or cubist landscapes. So because this was the leftist art of her time, of Sonja's time. So this is also one of the aspects of the visual language of the film, which I find very important. And that's why we kind of travel through the space and the landscapes transform and move. It was also very exciting because we discovered super weird stuff there. Directly in the woods, we discovered a really interesting kind of objects, which we don't know what they are, but they exist there deep in the woods where the partisans gathered around this small city in Serbia called Valjevo. And Sonia is from Valjevo, and she started her partisan struggle back there in the woods.
Yeah, I think basically you are showing how time itself is going through the landscape. So it's how the past is transforms into the present and then probably into the future. So it's also like an interesting way of confronting landscape as a space with time.
Yeah, it's also like a landscape as a witness of the events, because and also as these landscapes are actually, they bear the story themselves. So it's quite interesting for me to think about the landscape as let's say character, but as a very important element in the film. Of course, we have landscape cinema, so I kind of also draw from this tradition of landscape cinema, and that's why I was thinking about going like a step further and thinking about like how to inhabit the landscape with the different perspectives and gazes, and to make something which we have already, for example, in painting, called cubist or constructivist landscapes.
Yeah, I think we can also say that those empty landscapes are in fact full of bodies that once inhabited them. And at one point, the body of Sonia becomes a landscape.
Yeah, definitely. I was thinking also about the landscape in the film, how we produce a landscape, how we come to this moment when we say this is a landscape, and then I talked a lot with the director of photography, Ivan Markovic, like that we can produce a landscape by getting closer to things, not just by going, further and yeah, so we can optically get closer to things and produce landscape. So for me, Sonia's body was a landscape, but also was a very important element in the film, because this is the body that carries the story, that experiences the story, and this is the body that needs to transfer this story to our bodies who filmed, and also now to the bodies of the audience who will see or already saw the film. So this transfer of these stories is very important for me, and I wanted to make it as tactile as possible and to produce this haptic image which touch us from the screen. That story touch us in an emotional way, but the image touches in the optical way.
It does work like that. Coming back to the political side of the film, there is a line in the film that says that we don't need to be heroes in order to be partisans. And indeed, you don't show Sonia as a hero in the traditional sense of this word. So you don't kind of glorify the heroism of her experience. And I think what's also important that she herself, she doesn't describe herself as a hero. On the other hand, the film features those huge monuments of war heroes built in Yugoslavia, which kind of work as a symbol of the dominant historical narrative. I'm just wondering, what do you think about this constant tension and just relations between the very personal, extremely personal experience of the history and this kind of, institutionalized or even nationalized historical narrative?
Yeah, this is actually, you pointed it very well, because one of the main concerns in my work is this tension between memory and history. This is something that I find, very exciting to work with, and I draw a lot from Walter Benjamin, who has this idea that we, we choose certain history to be ours, and then we invest it into the future. And I think my previous film and this film as well are both about this. It's not about the history as something dead that happened back there, but it's something that I want to invest in my or our future. This idea of small heroes, this was something very important for both Anna and me, because Sonia was, definitely for me, a hero, but what is very exciting about her way of also speaking and building the story and the narrative is that she always mentions a lot of people that were involved. Her comrades, comradesses, how she did something. It was never alone. And I think the official history wants to take our institutions, of history or any institutions, they want to single out one person, and they want to kind of stress one person and heroic acts of one person. And this is one side of it. The other side is that, the film is affirmative to this idea of resistance that wants to say in a way or suggest that resistance is always possible. So all of us, we don't need to be heroes. We just need to decide to resist and join the struggle and actually, for what we believe in. What is, in the film, there is one big monument. It's a monument of Stjepan Filipović. He was people's hero. And actually what is very interesting, because during the images of this monument, we hear Sonia speaking about him. And he was one of her friends from the unit. And actually, Stjepan Filipović is considered internationally one of the symbols of anti-fascist struggle. And what is interesting, because she mentions him as a regular person who told her something in she doesn't speak about him as well as a big hero. She speaks about him as somebody who inspired her to overcome very difficult also situation when she lost her great love during the war. So when her partner was killed. This is also how I understand and why I use the monument, because I want to place this figure of a big hero also in a very regular, everyday historical narrative. Because, war also has everyday life, there is everyday life in the war. And I think, there is also very specific female perspective on this, and how Sonia remembers all the details and maybe things which official history would consider unimportant.
I wanted to ask you about the feminist touch. That the film definitely has, because it shows the war from a female point of view, which is still and heavily underrepresented. I'm wondering if you actually discussed this issue with Sonia, and did she ever feel herself silenced as a female survivor and witness of war? What was her take on that issue?
Yeah, definitely. We discussed. I mean, we discussed these feminist issues with Sonia because actually with the partisan movement, which was a communist movement, the position of the women in society got much better. So, for example, in Yugoslavia, women got the right to vote already during the war in the 1943, which was, of course, I mean, decided by the back then still the state in the war, the Yugoslav socialist state during the war. But actually, Sonia, as an activist, communist activist before the war, she was very active in actually going to the villages and explaining women why it's important for them to have a right to vote, why they should become part, I mean, equal part of the society. So this was something for her very important. On the other hand, for Anna and me, I mean, we read a wonderful book by Svetlana Alexievich called Unwomanly Side of the War. And actually from that, we draw a lot because we somehow, I mean, our idea of the womanly side of the war in the film, which we wanted to feature, got more conscious in a way. There is also this question like how women remember the war, because in the case of Sonia, we see that she, as I already mentioned, she really remembers people, like a lot of people who were part of her journey. Then all the details that happened, which are not just heroic historical facts, but really like how people related to each other, how they organized in order to survive, I mean, the terror of war. All these details I consider definitely this womanly side of the war, that we really experience this everyday life of a war, which is not just a male patriarchal dominant narrative that we have usually in the books, in historical books.
It took you more than a decade to make this film, and I think it's not only the portrait of Sonia, but it's also like a document of your own experience as a contemporary human being. So I'm just wondering how your own perspective has changed during those years, because like the world, the political world has changed tremendously, you know, in the past 15 years. So I guess you started to make it in kind of one world, and now we're in a completely different situation. So in that sense, how your political view maybe have changed during that time, and how those changes affected the making of the film.
Yeah, it's it's an important question. I mean, I was back then still a student of film. I felt also like that this story for me is very important, but maybe I cannot make a great film out of it because I still don't have the tools and resources. But that's why I continued, I mean, going back to her and recording the stories. But then also at some point, I also felt urgency, like in the last few years, to really finish the film, because I thought like this film now could inspire people to take more conscious political decisions, like how they as bodies, as a single body, as individuals, how they join the struggle and certain causes. Today, of course, the world is much, I mean, all these problems radicalized, I mean, with many things happening nowadays, which I don't know if we have time to deal, but definitely, I mean, in our local context as well. There is really radicalization of class society in Serbia, which I called wild capitalism. So many things which which actually they fought for, for workers' rights, for women's rights, for free education and dignity of people in the society or in the states they live in. I think this is very much lost. So we need to really remind ourselves that this was possible and that also somebody fought for it. So we need to also take a stand and fight for it today.
Thank you very much for this wonderful film. I think it's a very important and brave work of art. Thank you very much, Marta.
And thank you again.
I wish you all the best.